Thanks everyone for joining us. Must be another exciting topic. Got a great group of attendees on this beautiful Friday. So thanks for joining us. Continuing our conversation in the month of January about the cloud and cloud versus on-prem servers. And today I'm excited to have Peter Niebler join us. Good morning, Peter.
Morning. Thanks for having me again.
Peter, are you out there?
I am. Can you not hear me?
Sorry, I had my volume on mute. I couldn't hear Peter say good morning.
Oh, okay.
So that was my problem, not yours. So good morning. Thanks for joining us. We're really going to be talking today and tapping into Peter's knowledge about whether or not an organization could go serverless, which is really kind of one of those big questions that we're hearing a lot from clients. Those that have had traditional businesses and been around for a while, and for sure some startups that are really looking at today's environment and whether or not that infrastructure and that big investment and having kind of being constrained a bit to the on-premise servers and infrastructure makes sense. And so we're going to try to maybe debunk a few myths, have a good conversation about that, and at the end of the day really kind of look into the numbers, because the technology might be cool, but it's got to make sense financially. So Peter, you have maybe you could do a couple things here to get started. A little bit of background. I know you've joined me on some other webinars, and you've probably worked with some of the clients that we have on the webinar. But maybe a little bit of intro in your background, and let's get started with what you're hearing from clients as it relates to this topic, and kind of what you're advising for them to start to think about.
Sure. So I'm Peter. My role at Elevity is a solutions architect, and what that means is I'm working with clients more on the strategic side of things to design their IT infrastructure and match that to their business goals. I've had quite a long background in IT. I think I'm forgetting how many years now, but it's close to 20 plus. Everything from, starting out in the help desk type role to putting in servers and all the different technical pieces and consulting for small businesses. So this is actually a really exciting topic for me. I think, as I try to pull out my IT crystal ball, what are we going to be seeing and hearing? And I'm already hearing it from clients. They're looking at their data centers or their server closet and asking themselves and scratching their head going, how can I get rid of that? Is this the best way to do this? And it's a really good question. I think the initial reaction to that is just a full disclosure. My preference is people do move to the cloud, and I try to figure out a way to do that. But I think you have to be smart about it, and you have to ask the other side of the question, is this the right solution for my business? Both from a cost perspective and just a functionality perspective. So yeah, I don't know if that was kind of the intro part, answer your first question, but.
Yeah, good. It was, thank you. You mentioned that kind of your preference or what you're seeing in terms of good next steps for organizations is to move to the cloud. Maybe you could share a little bit of the why behind that.
Yeah, when I start weighing the pros and cons, generally speaking, moving to the cloud has more advantages. It's number one, it's very scalable. So you want to bring on a new employee, or you want to implement a new line of business application. It's very easy to turn on and very quick to do that, and cost effective. You don't have to go through a large budgeting cycle to see if you can have this large capital expense. And that kind of segues into the cost difference too. I think there's a trend right now, or it's been going on for a little while, to switch costs from that capital expense to that operating cost, and that's almost how all the cloud solutions work, where you're paying for what you need when you need it on a monthly basis. So yeah, that's.
Yeah, and I you were more involved in this years ago than I was. in helping organizations kind of determine that infrastructure. But what was the timeline that you used to have to think through? If you're going to buy a server, it needs to be able to support growth and future needs, and you really kind of needed to have a pretty clear crystal ball to determine those things. Was it a 5-year period that you had to make that decision based on?
Yeah, it was anywhere. So that typical life cycle for your server, and what we used to refer to as we call it like a network or server refresh project, that was 3 to 5 years, and it really followed the hardware warranty of the equipment, and both somewhat the life cycle of operating systems that were running within there. Um, and so you had to start budgeting it. You'd go through this large lift and shift from your old equipment to your new equipment, from your old operating systems to your new ones. Um, and you'd have to start budgeting for that, and after 2 years of putting it in, if you're going to replace it in year three, on the warranty. And now you don't have to, and then you had to, nurture it that whole time. That's one of the big advantages of going to the cloud, is now it's that hardware, that virtualization layer. You still have responsibilities, but a lot of it isn't your problem anymore. You're more focused on the applications, and that and the applications are what drive your business. So you're able to focus on what matters rather than, the blinking lights, whether they're red or green or, working or not. So
Sure. Yeah, and the flexibility that the cloud provides, I think, is probably was something that bigger organizations, enterprise organizations, or organizations with tons of data or tons of variability in their business really started to lean on. But we're seeing that being much more available and prevalent in our client sizes, in the small to medium or even mid-medium size organizations. So it, one of when organizations are considering this and they're starting to ask this question, what are some of the major considerations that they should be considering and evaluating if they're going to truly go in a serverless environment?
yeah, the two that I come out with right away are, will it work? I think that question isn't the answer to that question isn't as obvious as it seems. And then, is it financially the right choice? There is that myth that going to the cloud is cheaper, and that is not always the case. In fact, a lot of times it comes out more expensive. So when I work with a business that's asking this question, the first part, the will it work, really what you need to do is you need to look at all the pieces inside that their server infrastructure is doing for them now. And some of them aren't so obvious. There's ties between them. Everybody knows the applications they work with, but they don't know the networking underneath. They don't know the user management with like Active Directory underneath. And where does that go in the cloud? Even something as simple as printing, if they have, a sophisticated print infrastructure, what happens when that print server goes away? You want to start looking at all these different pieces and your applications and saying, okay, I have all these checkboxes I'm checking right now with my server infrastructure. What does that look like in the cloud? How do my users interact with it? I think that's off, the user experience is very important. You don't want to lessen that when you go to a new technology that's supposed to be better or has the idea of being better. And then at the same time, when I move these different pieces, what does that look like financially? You want to do that total cost of ownership, and you do still look at it in that 3 and 5 year cycle, but that's just so you can compare it to what you've been doing now. You don't want to just say, okay, well, great, I'm only going to pay, 800 or $1,000 next month for cloud, but you want to look at what you've been paying on premise versus on cloud over a time period. So it's looking at all those pieces. Will it work? And then the financial behind that.
So if we kind of take, I think the best approach would be to take everybody through the thought process that they'll go through. One is, will this work practically? Can we make this work from a user perspective, functionality? Can people get the information that they need? And Will it, what about the costs? And if those things all line up and we think, okay, yeah, this does make sense, what are some major considerations to consider that migration strategy, the change of getting everything off of the physical server, getting it into the cloud environment, and the pieces and parts for that whole process?
Yeah, I think there's harder parts than other in doing that. So what I look at first are the applications, and that's mostly because it affects everybody in the business. So how do we move those to the cloud? And there's different ways of going to the cloud. We love our acronyms in IT. So, but really the two main ways for the businesses we're working with are what's called SaaS and IaaS. There's a middle one called PaaS. I'll explain these. But SaaS is software as a service. That's what we're all familiar with. Like if you have a Gmail account, you're using software as a service where you log into a web portal, you have no idea what the servers are behind it. You don't care. You just use the software and trust that it's going to be there for you. Where that middle one, PaaS, is more of a niche thing for people like doing SQL applications or web applications in the cloud. So we don't see that as much in our customer base. We certainly see it, but it's not a typical like I'm moving my servers to the cloud. The other one, the third one is IaaS, which stands for infrastructure as a service. And what you're doing there is you're actually taking your Windows servers. Server is a general term. I got to be careful with that. That's like the software, and hosting that in basically a rented data center like Azure or AWS. So you still need to maintain your servers and your operating systems there. What you've done is you're paying for the responsibility of whoever your vendor is for the hardware and the virtualization layer underneath. So, but there's choices when you're doing this, and that's why I always start with the applications, because you need to choose: are you going to SaaS or IaaS? There's cost implications that are different there. There's user you know features and usability differences, whereas and responsibility differences. I try to move people to SaaS if I can because it's the most convenient. But sometimes you might have a line of business application on premise that just doesn't have a SaaS offering. So you have to have another solution for that. And so I always look at those applications. Can we move this to the cloud? Will this be a better user experience when we do that? And is it functional for our users? After that, you start looking at the underneath layers like Active Directory and the user management. And these are, even though they're not right in the forefront, but they're really important. Oftentimes your applications tie into them, and they are running your security, your identity management, and just your overall network and connectivity. So, but there's good solutions for that. I think that has gotten really far. Like if I look back 1 to 2 years and we were having this conversation, Jeff, I would be like, I'd really be thinking, you got to think this through, before you go to the cloud. This probably isn't going to work. Whereas now I'm like, this probably is going to work because there's good solutions. Azure AD is basically the same thing you've been using, and there's a migration path. There's good ways to manage your users. There's a lot of security offerings out there for being in the cloud, and connecting your applications back to your identity management. So, these are some of the concerns, but you want to think through, and I just do that by looking at all the pieces on your network and seeing what the cloud offerings are, whether that be a SaaS or an IaaS or even a PaaS offering. And then we build that roadmap for you to get there and put the cost underneath, of what that looks like.
Yeah, I think the statement that you made that hopefully everybody heard, and if not, I'll repeat it because I think it's an important one. A few years ago, 1 to 2 years ago, you went into these conversations thinking, okay, this probably isn't going to work, but on the outside chance that it can, it is cool technology. To today, you're thinking most likely this will work, but we better do our due diligence to make sure there's not some gotcha that's really going to impact performance and the practical capabilities that they're hoping to get. I think that's a big shift. And that comes from somebody who not only has a responsibility to designing that strategy, but we as an organization have the responsibility to support it. So if we make the wrong recommendation, we're on the hook for it just as much as the impact it has on the client. So we tend to be probably a little more conservative in our recommendation as it relates to that. So I think that's a big statement.
Yeah, and that you got to be able to change it as technology changes so fast. But and I think in technology today, when I look over things in the past, there's things that I tell customers, you can do this yourself. It's not that hard. And I want to empower our customer base, to be able to do things themselves. And a lot of things you can. Coming up with a cloud migration strategy, I'm still on the don't try to do this on your own. We've had a number of customers come to us saying, hey, we moved to the cloud, but we forgot about this one application. What can we do about this? And now they're looking at putting servers back in that they thought they were going to get rid of and maintaining two separate environments. And it ends up kind of a mess when the whole point was to simplify. And get the advantages of the cloud. So I think it's worthwhile for a business to stop and say, okay, what's the best way to do this and not go it alone?
Yeah, I would agree. That's an important step. Lean on experts, especially people that have high level certifications with partners like Peter. What was the last one you just got from Microsoft?
That is my M365 Enterprise Administration.
All right. Too many certificates to keep track of because you got a lot of them.
Yeah.
Good. All right. So the decided that we want to move to the cloud. We know that we can do it practically. We know our end users won't have a significant impact to how they can get their work done. We've engaged somebody who really knows what they're doing to help us plan our strategy. We think that we've got the cost under control as we look at this, but what are some of the variables as it relates to the cost of cloud? Because it's not a buy it, put in the closet, plug it all in, get everything connected, and now we don't have costs for the next 5 years. There's variables. So what are those variables that are in place that people need to consider and think through on an ongoing basis from the usage side of things?
Sure. So it's really again, I feel like might be repeating myself, but it's looking at this. So each of those pieces is going to end up having a cost in the cloud. But you're also shifting your expense, and you can't forget about, you still need some infrastructure, and that's networking infrastructure. It's not servers anymore. So you still have, a full IT budget with internet service, firewall, switches, wireless, to get you connectivity. And now you have, your different cloud applications, and another big one is security out there that are all going to have a monthly cost per user, and that could get kind of confusing. We've helped simplify that in different offerings we've done where we offer them as packages. We've gone out and done the homework to say, this is going to be an effective strategy in the cloud with these products. And instead of this giant landscape of choosing between the products, we've done that for the customer, right? And we've said, this will work. This is a cloud strategy. You need this piece, and this piece, for sure. And then we can add on these other pieces based on what you need. And then your cost is almost a per user per month cost, outside of that other infrastructure I mentioned, but it simplifies it that way. I'm not sure I answered your question there, but.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot to consider, and that I think that's what we're trying to get across is the technology is great. The application is very positive. It can apply to many situations, but there's just a lot of things to consider. Great. We have clients who have compliance concerns. We have clients that don't have compliance concerns. But is moving to the cloud an issue for anybody who's regulated, anybody that's got to worry about HINRA, FINRA, HIPAA, go down the list of acronyms that are compliance oriented? How have you guided clients that have those considerations?
I get this question, and it always makes me smile a little bit, because I'm like, well, this is one of the reasons to move to the cloud. These cloud providers are passing these certifications or offering these regulatory compliance standards. You look at Microsoft, they even have this entire compliance administration center that helps you do this. So it takes, to me, it takes a lot of that burden off of you. Imagine trying to, you're a 25 user business that has a server in the back room and you need HIPAA compliance on that. Are you going to be able to build that data center? Very doubtful. But the places you're going to move to, we'll know these concerns going in, and that'll be part of the strategy. And it'll be much easier. You basically say to an auditor, well, I'm here, so in Azure, and they have all these certifications, and it's an easy check mark on that. And a lot of these products also offer additional security features on top of that, like data loss prevention. So if you don't want to send out, you want to prevent users from sending out things that might violate that compliance standard, you have those tools at your fingertips, where you would have to pay lots of money to build that infrastructure yourself.
Sure. Good. I neglected earlier to mention that if you have questions, feel free to post them into the Q&A portion of Zoom. We can get your questions answered here soon. We're getting close to the end, so if you have one, throw it out there. Peter, what else are the some big things that people need to consider? There's a lot of different platforms. Amazon, Microsoft, IBM's got one. From a kind of an IaaS perspective, right, or PaaS perspective, what have you guided people through in terms of which kind of platform to choose and what things to consider?
I'm partial to Microsoft. I think that's a lot of, it's also what I know, but I think they are one of the biggest players out there, and worldwide, and their offerings are full stack. You can go, I would think, like, say you needed a virtual server inside of the cloud, right? And you were choosing between AWS and Azure. Well, most likely you're probably using Microsoft for either email or some other service, or you need another service. And that full stack solution that Microsoft offers, I think, very advantageous. You have seamless integrations rather than like cloud to cloud integrations. Microsoft has cornered the market on identity management. That's Active Directory. So, and I think that's the cornerstone of your infrastructure is how your users and your computers are managed and secured. So, to me, it's kind of unless there's like some niche thing that the VM needs to be in AWS or IBM's cloud, or even Google's, I don't. It's almost a no-brainer to me to go to Azure or look at that first. It would be considered. So.
Yeah, and just the integration with all of the other components, like you mentioned, whether it's using the 365 suite and how all of those things work together, it just seems to make sense. But there are other options. They're all available. We can help work through those and decide what does make the most sense. And we have relationships to help work through that. It doesn't look like any questions have come through, so we can go ahead and wrap up. Peter, wanted to thank you again for participating. It's been good information, great conversation. Obviously, a lot to know about the cloud, a lot to learn, and we are here to help. We do have the opportunity for people to work through a cloud assessment. If you have some interest in that, go to alevityit.com/assessment. and we'll be able to follow up with you, get a conversation scheduled, and decide, where we might need to go forward to further that. We also have future events coming. So if you want to register for our February events, you can go to gflash.com/events to see those things that are out there. You'll also be getting mailings or emails with links to go do that registration. So thanks again for attending. Have a great rest of your Friday and a great long weekend. Peter, enjoy your time, and thanks again.
Thanks. Take care.